April 18, 1943, over the dark green canopy of Bougainville, a formation of Japanese pilots scanned the sky with quiet confidence, certain no American fighter could touch them at altitude. Moments later, that certainty shattered. Engines roared as the Japanese flight pushed their throttles forward, expecting the familiar climb advantage that had saved them countless times. But a pair of distant silver shapes refused to fall away. The strangers held their altitude, closing the distance with a calm, predatory patience that unsettled even the most seasoned pilots. The Japanese leader banked hard, believing speed would save him. The silver aircraft accelerated instead, stretching toward him as if pulled by an unseen force. Only then did the pilots realize they were facing something new, something faster, something climbing with impossible strength. And before they could name the threat, the P-38 Lightnings were already on top of them. Long before that morning over Bougainville, Japanese pilots carried an unshakable belief: nothing in the American arsenal could climb like their trusted Zeros or outrun them in open sky. Early in the war, that confidence felt justified. Their aircraft were light, agile, and perfectly suited for aggressive vertical maneuvers. Dogfights across the Pacific had reinforced the idea that the Zero ruled the clouds uncontested. Yet whispers began circulating in intelligence briefings, rumors of a twin-engined American fighter unlike anything seen before. Many dismissed the reports as exaggeration. A heavy aircraft, they argued, could never threaten the light, nimble machines Japan relied on. The notion of a twin-boom silhouette overtaking a Zero sounded almost humorous to pilots who had spent years defining the sky on their own terms. But the war had changed. The distances were longer. The missions were harder. And American engineers, stung by early setbacks, had begun experimenting with something unconventional. The result was a fighter that looked nothing like the elegant lines of Japanese aircraft. It was angular, metallic, and intimidating, a machine built not for beauty, but reach, speed, and altitude. Still, the Japanese remained confident. They trusted their instincts, their experience, and the aircraft that had carried them through victory after victory. For them, the idea that an American fighter could climb past them was unthinkable. The Pacific had conditioned them to expect slow, lumbering opponents, easy to shake off with a sharp pull into the sun or a sudden burst of acceleration. Everything changed when reconnaissance patrols began reporting contrails at unusual heights, straight, unbroken lines far above the ceiling where Japanese fighters normally operated. Some officers urged caution. Others insisted no American pilot would dare take a bulky twin-engined craft into combat. What none of them realized was that the United States had finally fielded a weapon designed precisely for those unseen altitudes. A weapon with speed that didn't fade in a climb. A weapon that could wait patiently above its prey, then descend like a falling star. And when Japanese pilots finally encountered it, their long-held assumptions began to crack, quietly at first, then violently, until the skies they once dominated no longer felt predictable. The first real signs of change appeared during a routine Japanese patrol north of New Guinea. Four pilots were gliding above broken clouds, expecting little more than distant shadows of American bombers retreating toward their bases. The sky felt calm, familiar, until one pilot noticed a faint glimmer far ahead, a reflection that didn't match the profile of any single-engine fighter they had fought before. He radioed a warning, but the formation continued forward, confident they could outmaneuver anything that dared cross their path. The glimmer grew larger. A twin streak of silver, symmetrical and strange, emerged from the haze. For a moment, the pilots hesitated. The shape looked too large, too rigid, almost mechanical in a way that felt unnatural to them. Yet it moved with an unsettling purpose, sliding through the air as though the sky offered no resistance. Their leader ordered a climb, expecting the American intruder to lag behind as Japanese aircraft rose toward thinner air. The engines screamed, the nose lifted, and the formation climbed sharply. But the silver shape rose with them. Not struggling. Not sagging. Rising. The pilots exchanged uneasy glances. No American fighter had ever done that before. The formation split, each pilot peeling away to gain an advantage. It was a maneuver they had executed hundreds of times: divide the enemy, force confusion, then overwhelm from multiple angles. But the twin-boom fighter didn't scatter in panic. It simply chose a single target and accelerated toward him. The chosen pilot pulled into a steep climb, certain the heavier aircraft would stall first. Instead, the silver machine surged upward, closing the gap like a hawk catching an exhausted bird. The pilot felt his chest tighten. Something was wrong. This was no lumbering interceptor. Tracer rounds from the American aircraft sliced past him, bright streaks that broke the illusion of supremacy the Japanese had carried for so long. The fighter that was supposed to be too heavy, too slow, too clumsy, was suddenly above him, forcing him into a desperate dive. Down below, another Japanese pilot tried to outrun the silver machine by pushing his throttle past safe limits. His aircraft shuddered as he raced across the sea, trusting raw speed to save him. For a moment, it seemed to work. The distance widened. Hope flickered. But the P-38's engines, two relentless Allison powerhouses, began to close the gap again. Not dramatically. Not with a sudden burst. With a gradual, inevitable pull, as if the American fighter had extra seconds built into its design. Seconds the Japanese pilot could not match. Back at their base, surviving pilots struggled to explain what they saw. Some insisted it was a new bomber escort. Others argued it was a prototype. But every man described the same details: impossible climbs, relentless acceleration, and a frightening ability to hold altitude as if perched on invisible rails. Those early encounters spread across the Pacific like a rumor delivered by the wind. Pilots shared stories in hushed tones, convinced the Americans had unveiled a machine that defied every rule they understood. Yet many officers remained skeptical. They argued the accounts were exaggerated. Stress could distort perception. No aircraft that large could truly outclimb the zero. Still, unease lingered. Days later, a Japanese ace with over a dozen victories took to the sky determined to expose the myth. He believed skill could overcome any machine. He welcomed the chance to confront the strange newcomer and prove Japanese mastery still ruled the clouds. He spotted a pair of silver contrails long before he saw the aircraft itself. The trails were smooth, unbroken, and high, too high for comfort. Yet he climbed toward them anyway, confident experience would give him the edge. The contrails dipped slightly. Then the two shapes appeared, cold metal glinting in the sun. He climbed harder. The shapes climbed faster. The ace felt a chill run through him. He had never witnessed an American fighter rise so effortlessly. He pushed harder, trying to force a meeting on his terms, but the silver machines remained above him, watching, waiting. And then they dove. Not recklessly. Not wildly. With a frightening precision that revealed intent. The ace braced himself, realizing this was no rumor, no misreported encounter, no exaggeration from young pilots rattled by combat. The Americans had built something new. Something dangerous. Something that refused to fall behind or drop below. And the Japanese pilots were only beginning to understand how drastically the sky was changing. The turning point arrived on a morning that began like countless others: humid air rising from the jungle, the sea rolling in a dull silver sheet, and Japanese ground crews preparing aircraft for what they assumed would be another predictable day. Yet deep inside the command hut at Kahili Airfield, a quiet urgency filled the room. Two reconnaissance pilots had returned with shaken expressions, describing high-altitude intruders they could neither identify nor engage. Their superiors dismissed the reports as fatigue. But the pilots insisted they had seen something beyond the ordinary. As the officers debated, a distant hum crept across the coastline. At first it sounded like approaching bombers, familiar and sluggish. But the sound sharpened into a smooth, rhythmic vibration, two engines synchronized with a confidence that unsettled the men listening. The radar team reported two contacts descending from a height no Japanese fighter could reach fast enough. Within minutes, pilots scrambled to their aircraft. Dust swirled beneath their wheels as they raced across the runway, hearts pounding with the expectation of meeting American patrols they had defeated many times before. But as they lifted into the sky, the pilots noticed something strange: thin contrails high above, moving with a control and steadiness they had never associated with enemy fighters. One pilot, Lieutenant Sato, stared upward with an uneasy suspicion. He had fought Americans since the early days of the war and trusted the Zero's climb rate more than anything. But the shapes above him refused to remain distant. They glided downward in measured steps, never losing formation. Sato climbed to meet them, expecting the weight of the American aircraft to betray itself. Instead, the two silver machines began a slow spiral upward, as if inviting him into a contest he could not win. Below, more Japanese fighters joined the ascent. The sky filled with white trails twisting into the morning sun. The Americans continued rising, holding altitude with an ease that defied logic. Sato gritted his teeth, pushing his throttle harder, determined to force them into a mistake. But the P-38s did not falter. They climbed with a calm authority that felt almost mocking. Then, in a moment that changed everything, the two P-38s leveled off and accelerated, upward. Sato froze. No American fighter had ever done that. The realization struck him harder than the sunlight blinding his canopy. He wasn't chasing them. They were pulling him along, forcing him into thinner air where the Zero's advantage evaporated. His aircraft shuddered, protesting the altitude. The controls felt soft. The engine strained. The silver fighters remained unerringly steady. Without warning, the lead P-38 rolled inverted and dropped into a controlled dive, straight toward the Japanese formation. The second Lightning mirrored the maneuver, slicing through the sky with mirrored precision. The two aircraft descended like falling blades. Sato tried to turn, but the dive came too quickly. His squadron scattered, each pilot choosing a different escape route. The American fighters split their focus instantly. One chased Sato, the other selected a trailing pilot who never saw the attack beginning. Sato dove hard, hoping gravity would lend him enough speed to survive. He felt the Zero's frame shake as air rushed across the wings with brutal force. But the P-38 matched his dive, slipping behind him with a chilling inevitability. The heavy fighter should have struggled. Instead it cut the air like a sharpened spear. For the first time in his flying career, Sato felt hunted. Tracer rounds snapped past him. The sky lit with sharp orange flashes as the lightning pressed the attack. He banked violently, desperate to shake the American pilot. The Zero groaned in protest. Every maneuver he relied upon failed him. Every escape route narrowed. The P-38 held its position effortlessly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Another burst tore through the air. Sato's wingtip shuddered under the shockwave. He snapped the stick backward, climbing into a stall he hoped would trap the American fighter below. The Zero lurched upward. The world slowed. But the P-38 climbed with him. Not only matching the maneuver, tightening it. Sato's breath caught. This was the moment the old rules collapsed. The moment the sky no longer belonged to the aircraft that had dominated the Pacific. He dropped into a barrel roll, feeling the G-forces crush his ribs. The lightning followed. His instincts screamed that no heavy fighter should be able to maintain such precision. Yet the silver machine remained locked on him despite every maneuver. Finally, with fuel burning rapidly and altitude disappearing beneath him, Sato abandoned the climb and leveled off, hoping raw speed might carry him beyond the P-38's reach. For a brief moment, he gained distance. The Zero's nose sliced the wind, and the gap widened enough for hope to return. But the Lightning's twin engines began reeling him in once more, slowly, steadily, inescapably. Sato knew then that speed alone could no longer save him. A burst from the P-38's nose guns shattered his right wing. The Zero spiraled downward, flames licking the canopy as he bailed out into the rushing air. As Sato drifted beneath his parachute, he looked upward at the silver shapes circling above. They did not retreat. They did not rush home after the attack. They remained at altitude, surveying the battlefield like guardians of a realm no Japanese aircraft could reach. The moment crystallized in his mind, a moment Japan's air command could no longer deny. The Americans had introduced a machine that rewrote the laws of the sky. A machine that Japanese pilots could neither outrun nor outclimb. And the war in the air had quietly, decisively turned. Dawn broke over the Solomon Islands with a strange, brittle stillness, as though the air itself sensed what was coming. The horizon glowed with a soft amber light, revealing mist curling over the jungle like restless spirits. At the Japanese forward base, mechanics hurried across the tarmac, moving with a tension that had grown heavier in recent weeks. Reports of the mysterious twin-boom fighter had spread from squadron to squadron, turning confident pilots into quiet thinkers before every sortie. Today, those rumors would break into reality. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, one of Japan's most respected aces, tightened the strap on his flight glove as he approached his aircraft. He had fought through China, the Philippines, and the early days over New Guinea. His confidence had never wavered, until the last month, when younger pilots returned pale and shaken, describing an American fighter that did not behave like any machine they knew. Tanaka refused to believe such a machine could exist. If the Americans possessed such power, it would have shown itself earlier. And yet, the accounts shared one detail he could not ignore, the aircraft's ability to climb with predatory patience. He slid into the cockpit, masking his unease behind a calm expression. His squadron formed around him, engines growling to life. The runway shimmered with heat as the first Zero lifted into the air, then another, until 12 aircraft banked toward the rising sun. Their mission was simple: intercept a group of American reconnaissance planes reported near Bougainville. The Japanese expected sluggish opponents, perhaps P-40s or worn-out bombers. Nothing more. But 15 minutes into the flight, Tanaka saw the contrails. Thin, silver arcs stretching high above the morning haze. Too high. His chest tightened. Every rumor, every shaky report from returning pilots, every unexplained loss, they all suddenly felt heavier. He signaled his squadron to climb. The formation rose through soft clouds, sunlight dripping across their wings like molten gold. The air grew thin, and the roaring engines began to strain. But the contrails above stayed distant, calm, untouched by the struggle below. As they broke through a final cloud layer, the shapes became clear. 2 silver aircraft. Twin booms. Wide wings. Predatory stillness. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were waiting. For the first time in years of combat, Tanaka felt the ground slip from beneath him, though he was thousands of feet in the air. These machines defied everything he understood about American fighters. The P-38s tilted their wings slightly in acknowledgement, like duelists offering formal respect, then climbed higher. Tanaka swallowed hard. His pride would not let him back down. He motioned for his squadron to climb again. The Zero formation surged upward, 12 aircraft pushing against physics, engines howling at their limits. The P-38s rose faster. Tanaka stared in disbelief. No American fighter had ever outclimbed him, ever. But these two machines were not faltering. They weren't struggling. They weren't even accelerating aggressively. They were simply ascending. And enjoying every second of it. Tanaka felt heat crawl up his neck. He ordered another climb. The squadron strained upward, wings trembling as thin air clawed at their engines. One pilot's engine sputtered in protest. Another's propeller bit irregularly. Still the P-38s climbed, smooth, steady, indifferent. Then they stopped. 2 silver silhouettes hanging above the Japanese formation like executioners waiting for the command. Tanaka knew what came next. He tried to warn his pilots, but the microphones crackled at high altitude. The message dissolved into static. The P-38s rolled gently onto their backs and slipped into a diving arc. A dive so perfect it looked choreographed. The Japanese formation scattered instinctively. Tanaka dove, flipping his aircraft to break the attack. The wind shrieked against the canopy as he plunged through sunlight and cloud. But the dive did not save them. The twin lightnings sliced downward, one locking onto Tanaka, the other selecting a pilot who broke left too slowly. A burst of cannon fire erupted behind him, white flashes streaking across the sky. Tanaka felt his aircraft shudder. A round tore through his fuselage, showering metal fragments across the cockpit. He rolled violently, diving deeper, trying to use the Zero's agility as a shield. For a moment, it worked. He slipped beneath the P-38's guns and regained control. But the American fighter did not overshoot. It matched him. Every roll. Every dive. Every desperate turn. Tanaka pulled into a sharp climbing loop, using a maneuver that had fooled dozens of opponents in the past. The Zero leapt toward the sky with surprising grace, arcing behind the P-38 in a smooth, rising circle. He had it. He had the advantage. For a heartbeat, hope surged. Then the P-38 climbed with him. Not struggling. Not stalling. Accelerating. The realization hit like an icy spear. This aircraft wasn't fighting the laws of altitude. It was built to command them. The Lightning pulled tighter into the loop, its twin engines roaring with confidence. Tanaka tried to push his aircraft harder, feeling his engine rattle in protest. The cockpit trembled. The frame groaned. But the P-38 held perfect form, rising above him, then cutting across his line with a ruthless angle. Cannon fire erupted. Tanaka's left wing sparked violently. His aircraft lurched sideways, flames snaking along the leading edge. He spun out of control, fighting the stick with raw instinct. Below him, his squadron was being torn apart. 1-0 exploded midair, debris scattering like falling embers. Another tried to dive out of reach, but a P-38 followed him into the dive with terrifying stability, pulling the trigger only once. A single burst. A clean kill. The sky filled with twisting smoke trails and desperate escape dives. The Japanese formation, once confident, disciplined, and elegant, had become a scatter of hunted shadows fleeing a predator they could not understand. Tanaka regained partial control, leveling his burning aircraft long enough to see one of the P-38s rise back to altitude. It wasn't retreating. It wasn't escaping. It was returning to its perch, claiming the sky as its territory. The second Lightning followed seconds later, its silhouette sharp against the rising sun. They moved together, perfectly in sync, two machines carved from the same metallic resolve. Tanaka's heart sank. This was not a skirmish. This was a declaration. The Americans had created a fighter that erased Japan's greatest advantage. A fighter that ignored the rules Japanese pilots had trusted for years. A fighter that climbed where they could not follow and ran where they could not catch. Smoke filled Tanaka's cockpit. He unbuckled his harness and pushed the canopy open. Heat stung his face as he leapt into the rushing air. As he drifted beneath his parachute, he watched the twin lightnings circle above their fallen foes. They made no victory roll, no taunting display. They simply returned to altitude, silent sentinels of a new era. The battle was over. But the meaning of it had only begun to unfold. Word of the defeat spread through Japanese airfields long before Tanaka's boots touched solid ground again. Pilots who once walked with unshakable confidence now moved with a quiet heaviness, replaying the impossible climbs and relentless chases they had witnessed. For years they had ruled the Pacific skies with grace and precision, relying on instincts honed in battles where agility had always been enough. But the arrival of the P-38 Lightning fractured that certainty. Commanders gathered in makeshift briefing rooms, studying hastily drawn sketches of the twin-boom intruder. Reports came in from squadron after squadron, stories of dives that could not be matched, climbs that seemed to defy physics, and engines that delivered power far beyond their expectations. It was no longer rumor. No exaggeration. No isolated encounter. The new American fighter had rewritten the balance of the air war. Engineers and technicians inspected damaged aircraft, attempting to understand how an enemy fighter could inflict so much devastation so quickly. Torn fragments of Zero wings and bullet-scarred fuselages told a story no one wanted to believe. The P-38's nose-mounted cannon hit with a precision and force the Japanese aircraft were never built to withstand. The Zero, designed for agility and range, had met an opponent built for dominance. Pilots gathered in small groups, whispering about what they had seen. One insisted the Lightning climbed like a bird riding a thermal. Another described the eerie calm with which it held altitude, as if the wind itself moved aside for it. A third, a veteran of countless battles, admitted he had never felt fear in the sky until the moment he saw the silver machine rising toward him with silent, unstoppable certainty. Higher command began revising strategy. Gone were the days of confident vertical climbs that once broke American formations. Now pilots were told to avoid altitude contests entirely, to strike only when the Lightning was distracted or descending. But such opportunities grew rare. The P-38 pilots chose when to fight, where to fight, and how long to stay. The Pacific skies, once an open battlefield, had become a place where the Japanese could no longer dictate the terms. Even on the ground, the shift was undeniable. Japanese reconnaissance crews noted American patrol lines drifting farther and farther into previously secure airspace. Supply convoys that once relied on high-altitude escorts now traveled with caution, knowing the silver shapes could appear without warning. The psychological impact alone reshaped mission planning. Meanwhile, American pilots gained confidence with every sortie. They saw the shock in their opponents' maneuvers, the hesitation, the sudden breaks, the desperate dives. The Lightning had earned its reputation not through rumor, but through encounters where it consistently seized the initiative. For the first time since the early months of the war, American fighter crews sensed they held the advantage. In the weeks that followed, the Japanese attempted to adapt. They trained in new patterns, explored alternative tactics, and studied every scrap of intelligence on the unfamiliar fighter. But the reality remained unyielding. No amount of training could make the Zero outrun a P-38. No maneuver could make it outclimb one. The shockwaves of that truth reached deep into Japanese command. They understood what pilots already knew: the days of uncontested dominance were gone. The Lightning had pierced not only their formations, but the myth of invincibility that had carried them through the early war. The sky, once familiar and predictable, had changed shape. And the realization settled across every airfield with the quiet finality of a setting sun. The Americans had built a machine that could no longer be ignored, outmaneuvered, or escaped. The era of easy climbs and certain escapes had ended. A new kind of battle had begun. In the months that followed, pilots on both sides would speak of that shift as if a curtain had been pulled back from the sky itself. What once felt like a familiar battlefield, defined by instinct, tradition, and muscle memory, had transformed into something unpredictable. Japanese airmen who had grown up believing the Zero could climb out of any danger now carried the weight of a new reality. Skill alone could not overcome a machine built with such sweeping power. Yet even amid the losses, a quiet respect emerged. Many Japanese pilots admitted, sometimes reluctantly, that the Lightning was not merely a weapon. It was a message, proof that the war had entered a phase where engineering, reach, and altitude mattered as much as courage. The Americans had created something bold, unconventional, and brutally effective. And in doing so, they had forced everyone to rethink what dominance in the air truly meant. For the Americans, the P-38 became more than a twin-boom fighter. It became a symbol of possibility, a demonstration that innovation could rewrite the balance of an entire theater. Every mission it flew carried echoes of the battles where it had overturned assumptions that once felt unshakable. Looking back, it becomes clear that the moment Japanese pilots first failed to outrun or outclimb the P-38 was more than a tactical loss. It was the beginning of a broader shift, a realization that the war's outcome would be shaped not only by bravery, but by machines capable of redefining the limits of flight. And the sky, once ruled by agility and instinct, now belonged to the aircraft that could rise above them all. A new era had taken hold, quiet at first, unmistakable in the end.